now we have Mr. Atif Rashid. He's editor-in-chief of Analyst News in London, whose work highlights the role of independent journalism in combating disinformation and restoring public trust. Mr. Asif, we are eager to hear your views, especially with all these complicated atmosphere surrounding the misinformation and disinformation right now.
Thank you very much, and thank you for all the panelists as well. I think really what we're talking about today is where we've got a war on information and a war on truth going on today. And you know, when we've talked about disinformation and misinformation, what that really leads to is a breakdown of trust and a breakdown in society and a breakdown in peace. And you know, there's a very pertinent anecdote which is relevant to our conversation here, which really has stuck with me, is that, you know, a wise man was once asked that if you were made the leader of a nation or a government, what would be the first thing that you'd do? And he said, the first thing I would do is that I would change the names of things. I would change the titles and, you know, the names of the departments. And the person said, you know, what's that got to do with good governance? What's that got to do with, you know, effective leadership? And the wise man said that, look, when the names of things are wrong, then people don't understand what's happening, or they don't understand anything. And when people don't understand, then work isn't done properly. And when work isn't done properly, then our systems and our laws and our institutions that we've created, they break down and they disintegrate. And so this really reflects the need for there to be dialogue which is conducive to peace building, dialogue which is based on respect, and, you know, a return to moral values. Because when we start, you know, everything starts with rhetoric, everything starts with speech. And what we're seeing today is that there is so much hate speech, whether it's in the media, whether it's by politicians or governments, that it's really contributing to the increasing danger in the world and the wars that are taking place. The wars that are happening today are all predicated on disinformation, on complete lies, on fabrications, on exaggerations. And the media isn't challenging them. And this is a big issue today. I've seen it as a journalist in the UK for so many years, that the media is quick to parrot whatever a politician says. We know that politicians and governments lie. You know, yesterday, Jeffrey Sachs, you know, a very well-renowned American economist, he said that disinformation and misinformation, the greatest purveyors of these are big institutions and big entities like governments, political leaders, and even intelligence agencies. If you look at the Iraq war, it was based on a complete fabrication, complete lie. We were led to believe that WMDs are a huge threat. Saddam Hussein has WMDs, 45 minutes he can launch missiles into our countries. It was a complete lie. And look how many lives it destroyed, look how much unrest it caused, and there's still anger and frustration about this to this day. So when the media isn't doing its responsibility in challenging these lies, and today when we're on the doorstep of another global war, you know, the UN is supposed to be the central organization to preserve peace in the world, and if it doesn't take a forefront in, you know, tackling misinformation and disinformation, if it isn't more bold in doing that, then what hope does anybody else have? Because when the misinformation is coming and the lies are coming from major institutions and organizations, the only body that can really challenge that is a body like the United Nations, which has that authority, which has that platform, which can bring everyone on one stage. And the UN, I'm sad to say, as much as I love the work that it does, I've spoken to so many UN staff, they're so, you know, they have so much good faith, so much goodwill, but sadly, it's not doing enough. The systems itself are, like for example, the veto system is very undemocratic. It stifles free speech. When a country, or when the unanimous, the will of the United Nations is to condemn a country or call it out for its disinformation, then one member of the Security Council can veto that. When the very organization to create and maintain peace itself is unjust, or the mechanisms are unjust, I should say. I can't say the whole institution is unjust, because amazing work is being done, and I love coming here and speaking with like-minded people who are doing all this good work. But that's one thing that needs to be changed, which is that the UN should take be at the forefront of tackling disinformation and calling it out, especially when it comes from government actors. And I see that the Secretary General Gutierrez, his tweets are very bold, very brave, and his statements do a lot of good work. But it needs to be called out by official institutions like the UN, and also like some of your special rapporteurs. They do very, very good work. They're very diligent, and they're very respected. But the UN should be fully behind them. A lot of times they're smeared, they're labeled as spreading hate or spreading lies, which they're not. And the UN should, as an official body, be backing these people and backing the truth and the facts. In the UK, we had far-right riots just recently, and that was predicated on complete lies as well. It was so blatant the lie that it's just unbelievable how it led to such severe and violent riots, which really, really shook the country. From the top to bottom of the country, basically what happened was that 3 girls were murdered, and the lie that spread on social media, somebody posted that this was a Muslim immigrant. And he made up a name and he posted, it got millions of views like that. And people started believing it. And the far right clung on to that, and they incited their mobs, and they went up and down the country. My own mother was scared to go out of her own house, and refugees were being attacked, shops were being looted, and hotels which were housing refugees, they tried to burn them down. This is the danger of misinformation. This is the danger of disinformation. It will literally cause violence. It's literally causing wars, right? And the thing is that that's the fault of social media, but also, and by the way, it turned out that it wasn't a Muslim migrant. It was a Christian, British-born person, right? And it just went viral, and everyone believed it. It's like that saying that falsehood, a lie can spread around the world quicker than the truth can put its shoes on. And this is what's happening today. And I think we need to be bolder. Like Arun said that, sometimes us in the media is very timid. I've seen editors, they're very scared to call out something as it is. If it's a genocide, you should say if it's genocide. If it's fascism, you should say it's fascism. If it's racism, you should call it out as racism. We're too politically correct. We're too scared, because I've worked with editors. They change a headline because they get a call from an embassy or from some organization which pressures them and which forces them to change the headline because they're too scared. So journalists need to be bolder. The UN needs to be bolder. These institutions, we've already built these institutions and we've already built these laws, but we're not implementing them. So I think that's like the message that I like to give. There's much more I could say, but I think we need to be bolder and braver to call out misinformation and disinformation and blatant lies when they happen.
Okay.
Yeah, you name and shame them, right?
I think that mentioning the role of United Nations, I think it's yesterday, the economist Jeffrey Sachs mentioned that states tell lies, but superpower produce super lies.
Yeah.
So the role of governments here, to get the United Nations interfere and to have a real role in something like that, I think is starting with the influencing governments first. Your opinion on that?
Yeah. Do you want to?
Yeah, I think everything you said is so powerful, Atif, and I think it's really, there is such an asymmetry in the discourse that people who are willing to propagate lies do it by whatever means necessary, yeah. And those who oppose that in defense of pluralism, cohabitation, harmony, they're all too civil. I mean,
yeah,
really,
exactly.
There's not a willingness to change the tactics. And I think that's often embodied in forums like the UN, where there is a certain kind of a politeness that is out of sync with the barbarity all around us, really. I think that we really have to rethink the playbook.
Yeah. And also, even yesterday in one of the panel discussions, I think the former president of Serbia, he said that one of the major countries, they said, because you're a smaller country, we have the right to lie to you, right? So lying has become normalized. It's assault on truth. And when, like you said, when governments do it, they're doing super lies. And then intelligence agencies are doing it. And I think the only body that really can combat that is the UN. But again, like, I think media has failed big time in this as well. It's supposed to hold government to account. It's supposed to hold politicians to account. This is lazy journalism and it's shoddy journalism. Because what happens is politicians know that whatever they say, the media is just going to parrot it. And the media isn't supposed to just parrot whatever this, for example, if Arun, if you say it's snowing outside and you say it's raining outside, it's not my job to say, oh, Arun said it's snowing and she said it's raining. It's my job to go outside, look at what the weather is, and report that.
Yeah.
So, and there's many reasons for that. You know, there's also budget cuts in the media. There's a lack of proper investigative reporting. You know, we need to go back to this grassroots journalism where you're embedded within communities, you understand the topics properly, because look, as a Muslim journalist in the UK, it's very frustrating. There's 0.5% of journalists are Muslim, and we see that journalists just don't understand anything about Islam or Muslims. And for example, once the BBC did a report where they said that, oh, Muslims fast on Eid, and it's a day of celebration, where everyone knows that Muslims don't fast on Eid, they fast on Ramadan. It's just basic lack of media literacy within newsrooms, which needs to be, and also it comes back to geopolitics as well. Like, the media has to report on religion, it has to report on geopolitics, so they need to be educated more. And when a young person asks me how do you get into journalism, I say, don't go to journalism school, go and learn about, go do something that you're passionate about, human rights, economics, political affairs, international relations, because then in your journalism you can accurately reflect what the reality is. So it goes back to media literacy and media responsibility as well.
So my point is that when we talk about this organizing the news ecosystem, do you think that the burden on independent media like you is more important than challenging the mainstream media?
Yeah, I think it's a shame that like the mainstream media, the trust in mainstream media and in international institutions is fading, and it's a shame that lots of people are turning to independent media. And this is why we also felt that we had to set up Analyst News, which is a non-profit grassroots volunteer organization led by professional journalists, where we try to do slow analytical news. We do in-depth reporting. We don't just do reactive news like the rest of the media. Much of the media is based on corporate interests, political interests, it has some financial backings here and there, so you can't always trust it. So this is why, there was a Reuters report as well, how much of the audience is turning to independent media because they don't trust the mainstream media because they've got certain leanings this way or that way. And so, the role of independent creators like myself or like others is getting more and more important. But the risk there is that a lot of independent creators, they are just people in their bedrooms who are posing to be news organizations. On Twitter, when I look at Twitter today, even me, I can't tell what's true and what's not sometimes. As a journalist, I have to do my own fact checks. And so that's a really dangerous road to go down, but that's why we need professional journalists to stand up, to go back to traditional journalism, to do proper fact-checking, and don't just be responsive or reactive and try to be the first person to get this news story. And don't just report what you're being told. Take a step back, look at the facts, and analyze it. And so your audience is better informed. And also give the context. Because for example, a lot of the wars today that are happening, the media just says, oh, this country has bombed this country has bombed this country. That's not going to do any favors to anyone in the world without you giving the background to it, without giving the context to it, so that you have the complete picture. And that's why we at Analyst News are trying to do that much more, which is sad that we've had to create this, because the mainstream media, with all its budgets, all its resources, is failing to do that.
Thank you for our speakers for the insightful intervention, and for perfectly diagnosing the state of media and communication in the world today. Now I open the floor for discussions. Please identify yourself. Yes, please.
In your own work as journalists, because two of you are journalists, have you worked in the this is brought up education, have you worked together with schools, with education ministries, to try to deal with this already at a young age and trying to address the distrust that you find among young people in the professional media?
Yes, I'll go first.
Oh.
So yeah, I think that's vital to be able to tackle this issue when the kids are young, so that they grow up with these media literacy skills. And so I go to a seminary, an imam school, and I talk to them about the role of social media, how imams can use social media better to tackle disinformation about their own faith, and also how to tackle, and which sources to use. Because they always ask me, where should we get our news? And I say that don't focus on one platform or the other. Try to kind of immerse yourself in a broad range of resources and platforms. So that's one thing. And secondly, I think I'm actually part of the youth delegation here today, and that there was a program, a UN program called Eden, where it brought together young faith leaders and young media makers to learn from each other. And that's really, really important, because a lot of times media makers, like I've mentioned, don't have the religious knowledge or the skills to mediate between different religions or to reflect religious issues properly in their coverage. And a lot of time young faith leaders don't have the media literacy or the tools to be able to give certain positive messages or to reflect their faith in the media or on social media. So that was a really, really useful tool, and we actually made a podcast as part of that, talking to reformed extremists. And in fact, the funny thing is that all the reformed extremists that we spoke to, they all said that the factors that led to their reformation were all the same. And one of the main ones was that at a young age, they were basically really good values were inculcated in them from a young age. So their parents or their teachers or the schools taught them the values of humanity, inclusion, unity. And because of that, even when they grew up and they were exposed to harmful radical ideologies or disinformation or these kind of people who prey on vulnerable young and impressionable minds, even then they did veer into extremism a bit, but they stopped short of going into violent extremism, because all the values that they had been taught as a young person, that came back to them later on. So they snapped out of it. And apart from that, they traveled and they met with other people. So I think we are trying, and I think it's very, very important to try to save the next generation, because now I think we're very close to losing the war on information and on truth, because it's so widespread now. So we need to make sure the next generation doesn't suffer from this. And that's part of the way to deal with it. That's one thing. And like we spoke about media responsibility, regulation, the role of international bodies like the UN, it's going to take a concerted and multifaceted approach.
Okay, I'm Ana Clara from New Humanity of the Focolare Movement. We are a faith-based organization, and I would like to bring up the topic of the religious communities and our role in tackling also disinformation. You mentioned disinformation, tackling disinformation through AI or through media literacy, and I see that social media, it's actually mining, we saw mining trust among people, and I think religious communities has also an important impact in rebuilding trust. So I would like to hear from you, what do you think is the role of religious communities, faith-based organizations in tackling disinformation? Thank you.
Ambassador?
Yeah, I think religious communities have a very fundamental role to play here, because we know that religion is a very powerful motivating factor in the world, very powerful motivating power in the world. And I think I belong to the Ahmadiyya Muslim Youth Association, which is a religious youth group. And in all of the meetings that we have, and from day one, there's very, very clear and positive message given to the youth, and very, very clear theology given to the youth, so that they don't have an inferiority complex, and they don't kind of feel timid about expressing their beliefs and their views. And a few of the things that they're taught is that, for example, loyalty to your country and your faith go hand in hand, because we know that there's extremists out there who are trying to misuse Islamic theology to say that you are at war with your country, you should be at war with all other non-Muslims. So from a very young age, they're taught that loyalty to your faith and country go hand in hand, and there's no contradiction to it, so that there's love for your country, and so that somebody, and this, the other thing that they do is that they make sure that the youth are involved in community work, in charity work, because the young people who are involved in building and creating a country and serving it, they're not going to want to break it down later on, and they're not going to be influenced by other bad faith actors later on. And also the other thing that happens in the meetings is that they pledge allegiance to not just their faith, but their country as well. And they raise the British flag, or whatever country they're in. It's not just in Britain. So I suppose, you know, making sure that religious communities are giving a very, very firm grounding in, you know, basic religious principles. Because everything that we're talking about, I believe that religion has a solution to. Because religious principles, they're the same as journalistic principles. You know, uncompromising pursuit of truth, you know, justice, giving a voice to the voiceless, standing up for the oppressed. Journalists are taught to pursue this, and religions also teach this. And so, you know, I think if religious communities educate their own members, give them a firm grounding, and also give them role models. Another thing that happens in the Ahmadi Muslim Youth Association is that they have role models at every sector of society. So in the local level, regional level, national level, they have youth role models who they can confide in. They're like mentors. They can always go to for questions, they can go to for advice, and they can seek help and guidance for their career. And so there's always opportunities, there's always hope. And when a young person has hope and opportunities, then they're much less likely to be influenced by radical extremism.
Thank you. I will take this final words in 30 seconds, starting with Amir.
Yeah, I think just like I mentioned in the beginning, we're facing a information war and a war on truth. And I think it's the role of all of us stakeholders in the peace of the world to take a stand against disinformation and misinformation, and make sure that we, at least in our own circles, are calling out, you know, falsehoods when we see them. At least if we're not sharing internet propaganda or fake news, then at least we can be part of the solution. But also, just quickly to touch upon the point about funding, where there's a political will, there's always ways to find funding for education. Our governments find funding for wars and weapons, but can't they find funding for our kids and our education? So I don't accept the argument of funding, because, you know, and then on the state propaganda, that's probably a huge, one of the biggest issues of our time and dangers of our time, and that again is going to take concerted effort. I think UN is well placed to deal with that, but also we need to go back to like basic journalistic ethics and morality and, you know, good faith actions to resolve these issues. So it's going to have to be a multifaceted approach, and I think at least as individuals we can have individual responsibility as well.